The Vexal Concordat did not believe in ghosts, which was a failing of imagination they would soon come to regret. Theirs was a galaxy of cold, hard fact, a domain carved from 200,000 worlds by the Cathar, a species whose philosophy was as unyielding as their chitinous armor. For 3 millennia, their Concordat had been the only truth that mattered, an empire of absolute order built upon the bedrock of a single foundational lie. Senior chronologist Kalen served that lie with the quiet devotion of a priest. His world was the Grand Archive on Cathar Prime, a moon-sized sphere of black marble and silent, refrigerated data vaults where the official history of the galaxy was curated, pruned, and perfected. He was a small, soft-bodied creature by Cathar standards, a Xylon whose people had been absorbed into the Concordat centuries ago, trading their culture for the safety of imperial rule. His days were spent in the hum of data stacks. Ensuring the narrative remained consistent, the Concordat was eternal. Its rise was manifest, and its enemies were dust. The greatest of this dust was the Lumin, a species consigned to a footnote in the archive's deepest codices under the heading The Ethel Heresy. The official record was terse and dismissive. The Lumin of Ethel, a dangerously volatile and emotionally erratic species, had risen in a brief, arrogant rebellion 3,000 years prior. Their ambition outstripped their technology, and in their hubris, they unleashed weapons that consumed their own world, a fitting end for a people who challenged the inevitable tide of Concordat expansion. The Cathar had merely observed the self-immolation, arriving afterward to sterilize the system as a sanitary measure, a final act of galactic hygiene. This was the truth Kalen had cataloged 1,000 times, a closed loop of history, neat and final. But history, he was beginning to suspect, was not nearly as dead as the Lumin. It began as a flicker in the deep-range network, a data anomaly so faint it was almost statistical noise, an unscheduled diagnostic ping from the vicinity of the quarantined Ethel system. Impossible. The entire sector was blanketed by a layer of sentinel drones and communication jammers that had not been serviced or spoken to in 3,000 years. Nothing got in. And nothing got out. Kalen logged the event as a sensor echo, a common phantom caused by gravitic distortions from a nearby nebula. He made a note, sealed the file, and tried to forget it. A week later, it happened again. This time it was not a ping, but a packet. A tight beam burst of corrupted data that sliced through the quarantine field for less than a nanosecond before the ancient jammers clamped down. The packet was gibberish, a chaotic scream of binary code that the archive's translation engines immediately flagged as null. Yet, Kalen felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. The structure of the code, beneath the layers of corruption, it was elegant. It was patterned. It was not random. He spent a cycle in his private workstation, running decryption protocols that were technically beyond his clearance level. The Concordat did not encourage curiosity. The data fought him, twisting and reconfiguring itself as his programs tried to gain purchase. It was like wrestling with a ghost that changed its shape every time he thought he had it pinned. Finally, after hours of painstaking work, he isolated a single, coherent fragment. It was not a message. It was a question. A simple, terrifying query embedded in the heart of the chaos. Where is star pattern 7B93A? Kalen's 3 hearts hammered against his ribs. That was not a standard stellar designation. It was an archaic mapping coordinate, a system the Concordat had abandoned millennia ago. On instinct, He cross-referenced it with the oldest celestial charts in the archive, the ones hand-drawn on flaking fiber scrolls from the Age of Expansion. It took him half a day to find it. Star Pattern 7B93A was the pre-imperial name for the Cathar Prime system. His home. The ghost was asking the way. He told no one. To report this would be to admit a flaw in the Concordate's perfect quarantine, to suggest that a dead species was somehow reaching out from a dead world. It was heresy. He would be stripped of his rank, his life's work undone, and likely sent to a reassignment colony on some frozen rock where the only history was the slow grind of ice. He tried to rationalize it. It had to be a derelict autoprobe from another species, its navigation systems failing and spitting out ancient data. It was a coincidence, but the feeling of being watched, of a cold intelligence staring at him across 30 centuries, would not leave. The incidents grew. A Concordat trade freighter on the Outer Rim reported a momentary loss of navigation, its systems inexplicably resetting to a course that would have taken it directly into the Ethel quarantine zone. In the Viridian Nebula, a deep space communications relay began broadcasting hymns, discordant, polyphonic melodies in a language no living being had ever heard. The military patrols dismissed these as isolated malfunctions, the inevitable decay of a galaxy-spanning infrastructure. But Kalen saw the connection. He began compiling a secret file, a chronicle of ghosts, the navigation failure, the comms hijack, a dozen other small, inexplicable events. They formed a trail, like breadcrumbs dropped by an unseen hand, all leading back to the silent, forbidden grave of Ethel. He started to dream of them. He had seen the archival images of the Lumin. Of course, they were unsettlingly similar to his own Zealand physiology, bipedal and slender, but their faces were said to be disturbingly expressive, their eyes reflecting a chaotic inner world the Cathar had deemed a threat to cosmic stability. In his dreams, they were shadows with burning eyes, whispering in that singing language from the relay, their voices full of a grief so profound it felt like an acid eating through the metal floors of the archive. He knew he was close to a dangerous line, a precipice of truth from which the Concordate permitted no return, but the compulsion to know was stronger than his fear. He believed in order, in the sanctity of the record, and the record was showing a flaw, a crack in the foundation of everything he knew. The ghost in the machine was no longer just probing. It was learning. It was adapting. It bypassed regional network hubs and began to touch the core systems of concordant worlds, its touch as light as a moth's wing. The climate controls on a frontier agri-world would flicker for a second, causing frost to appear on 1 billion leaves before correcting. The public chronometers in the capital city of Cygnus X1 would all skip the same heartbeat, a moment lost to an entire planet. No one noticed. No one except Kalen, who now saw its signature everywhere. Then came the message. It did not arrive on a military channel or a high-priority administrative network. It appeared on his personal datapad, materializing in an undeletable file as he sat in his sterile living quarters. There was no sender, no timestamp, no origin. The file contained only one thing, a perfect, 3-dimensional star chart. It was not the current Concordate map, with its color-coded sectors and established trade routes. It was a map of the galaxy as it had looked exactly 3,000 standard years ago. Kalen's breath hitched. Thousands of systems were rendered in cool blue light, but one, and only one, glowed with the warm, brilliant white of a living world. Ethel. Beneath the celestial sphere, hovering in the holographic space, was a single symbol he had never seen before, a circle entwined with a spear. Below that, a sequence of numbers began to scroll, stark and relentless. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, prime numbers, the universal language of mathematics. It wasn't a signal anymore. It was an introduction. Kalen stared at the glowing map, the symbol, the cold, irrefutable logic of the prime sequence. The Lumin heresy was not a footnote. It was an unfinished chapter. And the ghost of Ethel was not just asking the way home. It was announcing its return. With trembling hands, he erased his search history, encrypted his secret file, and composed a formal request to the Archive's Central Command. He cited a need to cross-reference data for a historical treatise on pre-imperial navigation. It was a flimsy pretext, but the only one he could devise. He requested access to the sealed vaults, the Level 0 archives, the records pertaining to the final days of the Ethel heresy. The request was sent. For a long moment, the system was silent. Kalen held his breath, imagining the silent algorithms weighing his clearance, his loyalty, his unprecedented demand. He expected a denial, a polite but firm rejection that would be a warning in itself. Instead, a new icon blinked on his console. It was not from the Archive Command. It was a sigil he recognized with a jolt of pure terror, the black, unblinking eye of the Concordate's Internal Security Directorate. A single line of text accompanied it. Your request has been noted. A compliance officer will be dispatched to your location to assist you. He had not found a ghost. He had stumbled into a tomb and alerted the keepers. The room suddenly felt colder, the silence of his apartment replaced by the deafening sound of his own pulse. He looked back at the star chart on his datapad, at the glowing white sphere of a world that was supposed to be dead, and understood his life as a quiet, obedient archivist was over. He was no longer just a reader of history. He was now a part of it. The compliance officer was a Cathar. Of course. He arrived without ceremony. A towering figure of polished black chitin and quiet menace named Inquisitor Vorlag. His footsteps were the only sound in the cavernous Grand Archive entrance hall. Each deliberate click on the marble floor, a pronouncement of authority. He did not move like the lumbering Cathar warriors Kalen had seen in archival footage. He moved with the unnerving grace of a scalpel, precise and purposeful. He had 4 arms, as was standard for his species, but kept the upper pair folded behind his back, a gesture of restraint that was more intimidating than any overt threat. His multifaceted eyes, 1,000 tiny lenses of cold obsidian, absorbed the light and reflected nothing. He carried no visible weapon. But Kalen had the distinct impression the Inquisitor's entire body was a weapon. Senior Chronologist Kalen. Vorlag's voice was a low, resonant, chitinous rasp, like stones grinding together in a deep cave. It was devoid of inflection, a perfect instrument of the Concordate's will. You requested access to the Level 0 codices. I am here to facilitate your inquiry. The word facilitate hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. This was not assistance. It was an audit. Vorlag was here to observe, to measure, and to judge. Kalen's 3 hearts beat a frantic, asynchronous rhythm. Yes, Inquisitor. For a treatise on the evolution of stellar cartography, I require primary sources from the Age of Expansion. His own voice sounded thin and reedy. A pathetic lie in the face of such implacable presence. Vorlag's head tilted a fraction of a degree. Indeed. A noble pursuit. The foundations of our great Concordat must be diligently maintained. There was no sarcasm in the statement, which made it all the more chilling. He truly believed it, and he would excise any threat to those foundations without a moment's hesitation. Follow me. Without waiting for a reply, Vorlag turned and walked toward the central spire of the archive, the secure axis around which the entire moon-sized station was built. Kalen scrambled to keep pace, his soft Xylan feet padding silently behind the Inquisitor's heavy tread. The journey to Level 0 was a descent into the past, both literal and metaphorical. They passed through a dozen security checkpoints, each more archaic than the last. Biometric scanners and energy shields gave way to massive tumblered locks of solid tungsten and pressure plates calibrated to a Cathar's specific weight and gait. The air grew colder, drier, tasting of dust and ozone. The hum of the archive's data servers faded, replaced by a profound, tomb-like silence. The final access point was not a door, but a vault, a 10-meter-thick circular plug of neutronium-laced alloy that retracted into the floor with a groan that seemed to shake the station to its core. Beyond it lay a circular chamber, its walls lined not with glowing data crystals, but with physical artifacts. Crystalline memory cores pulsed with a faint, trapped light. Bio-sealed canisters contained what looked like preserved neural tissues. On a central dais, under a stasis field, rested a single, blackened data slate, cracked and heat-scarred. This was not a library, it was a mausoleum of inconvenient truths. The Ethel heresy, Vorlag stated, gesturing a lower hand toward a specific section of the wall. All primary command-level data is stored in these cortex imprints. They are unrefined, the direct neural recordings of the officers who served in the Ethel campaign. They contain the full sensory data of the events. Be warned, chronologist. The official histories are abridged for a reason. Raw truth can be a poison to minds not conditioned for it. Kalen felt a tremor of fear, but also a surge of desperate resolve. This was it. This was the source code of the lie. He approached the designated alcove and selected a cortex imprint labeled with the insignia of the Concordat 7th Annihilation Fleet, the unit credited with the final sanitation of the Ethel system. The device was a cold, smooth ovoid that seemed to thrum with a latent energy. He slotted it into a reader terminal, a heavy brutalist piece of machinery that looked as ancient as the records it held. A cushioned cradle extended from the console, designed to fit a Xylan head. He hesitated, then took a deep breath and lowered his skull into the device. Needles, fine as spun light, extended from the cradle and painlessly pierced his temporal lobes. The world dissolved. He was no longer Kalen, the archivist. He was Fleet Commander Baresh, a 7-foot Cathar warrior, staring out from the command bridge of his flagship, the Will of Stone. Before him, on the main view screen, a world was dying. But it wasn't the way the histories described it. Ethel was not burning from self-inflicted wounds. It was singing. The planet was enveloped in a shimmering, iridescent corona of light, a web of energy that pulsed in time with a sound that resonated not in the ears, but directly in the bones, in the mind. It was the same polyphonic, melodic language Kalen had heard from the hijacked comms relay. But this was the source, a planetary anthem of unimaginable power. The Lumin were not fighting. They were performing some kind of ritual, a final, species-wide act of something Barash's Cathar mind couldn't comprehend. The sensory data was overwhelming. Kalen felt Barash's confusion, his rigid adherence to protocol, warring with a primal sense of awe and terror. The Lumin ships, slender and organic-looking, were not firing weapons. They were arranged in a perfect geometric lattice around their planet, acting as focusing lenses for the energy their world was emitting. They are attempting a trans-dimensional ascension. A science officer's voice crackled through Barash's neural implant, the tone strained with disbelief. They are trying to unravel their physical forms and imprint their collective consciousness onto the quantum substrate. They are not destroying their world. They are trying to become it. Kalen felt a wave of cold realization wash through him. The Ethel heresy wasn't a rebellion. It was an evolution. The Lumin had found a way to escape the confines of flesh and blood, to merge with the very fabric of the universe. To the Cathar, a species for whom the physical form and absolute order were sacred. This was the ultimate blasphemy. It was not war. It was a conceptual plague, a chaotic idea that could unravel their entire empire if it were ever allowed to spread. Barash's command came, filtered through Kalen's borrowed senses, cold and resolute. The Concordat does not permit apotheosis. Their existence is a violation of natural law. Fire the planet cracker torpedoes. Burn their heaven down to the last atom. Leave nothing but sterilized bedrock and a cautionary tale. The torpedoes launched. Kalen witnessed the impact, not as a silent explosion in space, but through Barash's eyes, feeling the grim satisfaction as the iridescent song of Ethel turned into a silent, catastrophic scream of light. The energy field collapsed, imploding with the force of a supernova. The planet fractured, its continents turning to molten slag. The Concordat hadn't simply glassed a rebellious planet. They had murdered a god in its crib. They had committed deicide and called it sanitation. The imprint ended. Kalen stumbled back from the console, ripping his head from the cradle, gasping for breath. The sterile air of the vault felt thick, suffocating. He looked at his own trembling hands, then at Inquisitor Vorlag, who had not moved an inch. The Cathar's multifaceted eyes seemed to see right through him, into the stolen memories still echoing in his skull. Stellar cartography. Vorlag rasped, the words dripping with cold irony. A fascinating field of study. Before Kalen could form a word, a low chime echoed through the vault. He glanced at the console he had just used. A new file had materialized on its screen, bypassing the machine's closed system protocols. It was the symbol he had seen on his datapad, the circle entwined with the spear. Below it, the prime number sequence was scrolling again, but faster now, accelerating, as if in agitation. 19, 23, 29, 31, 37. The ghosts knew. They had felt him watching their birth, their murder. They were no longer just a signal in the void. They were an audience, and they had just witnessed him uncover their truth. Vorlag stepped forward, his shadow falling over Kalen. You have been a great asset to the Concordat. Chronologist. You have confirmed a dormant security threat has become active. He placed a heavy, four-fingered hand on Kalen's shoulder, the grip as gentle and as inescapable as a coffin lid closing. You have also demonstrated a dangerous susceptibility to heretical data. Your service in the Grand Archive is concluded. The massive vault door began to grind shut, the sound of a closing grave. Kalen's mind reeled. He was trapped. Trapped in the deepest, darkest secret of the Empire, with a truth that could shatter the galaxy and a guardian who would ensure it never saw the light of day. But as the last sliver of light from the corridor vanished, plunging the vault into near-total darkness, the console screen flared. The prime numbers stopped scrolling. They were replaced by a single, perfectly formed question written in the elegant, flowing script of the ancient Lumin. It was addressed not to the Concordate, not to the galaxy, but directly to him. Chronologist. Do you hear our song? Kalen stared at the words, his terror momentarily eclipsed by a profound, chilling sense of connection. He was no longer an observer of history. He was a conduit, and the ghosts of Ethel had just found their voice. Inquisitor Vorlag moved with a speed that defied his bulk. One moment he was a statue of judgment, the next a blur of black chitin. A lower hand shot out and clamped around Kalen's throat, lifting him effortlessly from the floor. The grip was not crushing. Not yet. It was a simple statement of absolute physical dominance. Kalen's feet dangled uselessly, his soft Xylan body a fragile toy in the Inquisitor's grasp. The air rasped in his lungs. Vorlag brought him close, until Kalen could see the thousand-faceted stare of his obsidian eyes, each lens a tiny window into a cold, orderly abyss. The heresy speaks. Vorlag's voice was a low growl, stripped of its formal veneer. And it speaks to you. This is no longer an audit. Chronologist. It is a vivisection. Tell me what you did. What frequency did you use? What ancient code did you broadcast to awaken this? Echo Kalen choked, his hands clawing weakly at the unyielding chitin of Vorlag's arm. He had done nothing. He had merely been curious, a fatal flaw in a galaxy that rewarded obedience. He tried to speak, but only a strangled gurgle escaped. On the console, the glowing Lumin script shifted. He hers. He does not speak. Vorlag's eyes flickered to the screen, his grip tightening infinitesimally. A digital infection. A mimetic virus left to fester for 3 millennia. Did you think we were unaware? The quarantine was not just to keep others out. It was to keep it in. He turned his gaze back to Kalen, the pressure increasing. But it has found a new host, a new vector. You. The vault. A chamber of immutable silence for centuries began to change. A low hum emanated from the crystalline memory cores lining the walls, the faint light within them pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm, like 1,000 sleeping hearts beginning to stir. The temperature dropped, a sudden, biting cold that had nothing to do with the station's life support. It was the cold of deep space, the cold of a long-dead ghost breathing on the back of his neck. Vorlag ignored it. Answer me. How did it breach our systems? The question was a demand for a rational explanation, for a flaw in the Concordate's perfect logic. But Kalen, staring into the face of his executioner, felt a strange clarity pierce through his terror. He remembered the feeling of Commander Borash's satisfaction as Ethel screamed. He remembered the science officer's awestruck horror. The Lumin were not a virus. They were a song, and he was not a host. He was an ear. We were never contained, the console wrote. We were observing. Your Concordate is a monument to fear. We have studied its every fracture. The hum from the cortex imprints grew louder, rising in pitch. The dais at the center of the room, holding the cracked data slate from Ethel, began to glow, its stasis field wavering. Vorlag, for the first time, showed a flicker of something other than cold control. It was not fear. It was disgust, contempt for the chaos, for the violation of order. An echo cannot learn. He snarled, more to the room than to Kalen. It can only repeat. He threw Kalen across the room. The Xylan's body slammed into a rack of sealed canisters, the impact sending a jolt of pain through his entire frame. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, his throat a raw, bruised ruin. Vorlog turned his attention to the console, raising a heavy, clawed hand. I will silence this ghost, and then I will dissect its memory from your neural pathways. He meant to smash the terminal, to destroy the conduit. But as his hand descended, the stasis field on the central dais collapsed completely. The blackened, cracked data slate flared with an intense white light, and a wave of pure sound washed through the vault. It was the song. Not a broadcast, not an echo, but the thing itself, a complex, layered harmony of thought, emotion, and mathematics that crashed against Kalen's mind. It was a lament for 1 billion murdered souls, a hymn of cosmic loneliness, and a battle cry of impossible survival, all woven into one. Kalen cried out, clutching his head as raw information flooded his senses. He saw it all. He saw the Lumin, not as shadows, but as beings of light, their physical forms a temporary vessel for a consciousness that spanned generations. He saw their great work, the attempt to create a stable, peaceful singularity, a heaven woven from the fabric of space-time itself. He saw the arrival of the Cathar, who saw this collective evolution not as a miracle, but as a cancer, a chaotic union that threatened their rigid, individualistic hierarchy. He saw the concordance lie in its purest form. They did not fear Lumin aggression. They feared Lumin transcendence. They feared an alternative to their brutal philosophy of conquest and control. The song was a truth so potent it was a weapon. The effect on Vorlog was different. The Cathar Inquisitor recoiled, a harsh, grating hiss escaping him. To his ordered mind, the song was not information, it was a cacophony, a wave of pure chaos that assaulted his senses. The multifaceted lenses of his eyes dilated in a disoriented flicker. He was a creature of logic and law, and he was being drowned in a sea of conceptual art. "Cease this noise," he roared, staggering back. The vault's systems responded to the song. The lights flickered and changed color, painting the room in the shifting, iridescent hues of the dying ethel. The gravity plating beneath their feet fluctuated, creating disorienting ripples of weight and weightlessness. The very architecture of the room seemed to be in flux, the walls shimmering as if losing their physical cohesion. The vault was no longer a concordate prison. It had become a Lumin temple. Vorlag, regaining his composure, lowered his head and charged. He would not be swayed by sensory tricks. He would destroy the source. He lunged for the glowing data slate on the dais. But Kalen, empowered by the flood of understanding, moved. He didn't know why, but he knew he had to protect the slate. It was not just a relic, it was their heart. He scrambled to his feet and threw himself in front of the dais. It was a suicidal, illogical act, a soft-bodied scholar trying to stop a charging behemoth. Vorlog would tear him in half, but the song swelled, and the air around the dais solidified into a wall of shimmering, melodic force. Vorlog crashed into the invisible barrier, the impact producing a deep, resonant chime that echoed the Inquisitor's own frustrated roar. He hammered against the field with his chitinous fists, each blow creating another musical chord, another ripple of light. He was trapped outside the heart of the storm, a storm that now centered on Kalen. The console screen went blank, then filled with a new message, pulsing in time with Kalen's frantic heartbeats. You are the archivist. The record is incomplete. We did not all ascend. Some of us fell. We were shattered, scattered. We became the ghosts in your machines. But you, chronologist, you can make us whole. Kalen stared at the words, understanding dawning. They weren't just a consciousness. They were fragments. A digital diaspora clinging to the Concordate's own network, leaderless, formless. They needed a focal point, a translator, a mind that could bridge their conceptual existence with the physical world. Vorlog, realizing direct assault was futile, backed away from the barrier. His posture changed, his fury solidifying into cold. Final purpose. He raised one of his lower arms, and a panel on his wrist slid open, revealing a small, glowing keypad. The Concordate has contingencies for conceptual contamination, he stated, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. This vault is equipped with a terminal sterilization protocol, a full-spectrum plasma purge. It will vaporize all organic matter and scour every data device down to its base molecules. The heresy will end here, now. A timer appeared on a small monitor near the vault door, its crimson numerals stark against the darkness. 180 seconds. Kalen's blood ran cold. This was it. The end. A grave for him, the Inquisitor, and the last remnants of a murdered species. The Lumin song in his head shifted, the lament turning to a tone of urgent, desperate pleading. The barrier around him dissolved. The reader, the console flashed. Become the record. Become the key. He looked at the Cortex imprint reader he had used before, its cranial cradle open like a waiting mouth. They were offering him an escape, but not one of flesh and blood. It was the same choice their ancestors had made 3,000 years ago to abandon the physical form, to unravel himself and become a part of their quantum consciousness, to become a ghost. He looked at Vorlag, methodically tapping in the final authorization codes. He looked at the timer. 90 seconds. The choice was between two kinds of death, the finality of plasma fire, or a terrifying, unknown transformation. He was a creature of facts, of records, of tangible history. To become an abstraction was a fate worse than death, but to let the song be silenced forever, that was a failure he could not bear. With a sob of terror and resolve, he stumbled to the console and plunged his head into the cradle. The needles of light pierced his skull. Vorlag turned. His final code entered. A look of grim triumph on his face. He lunged toward Kalen to rip him from the machine, to ensure he burned with the rest of the heresy. But he was too late. As the timer hit 0 and the plasma emitters in the ceiling began to glow with white-hot energy, Kalen's world did not end. It expanded. His consciousness was unspooled like a scroll. His memories, his identity, his very being digitized and copied into the song. He felt a billion fractured voices welcome him, a chorus of ghosts embracing him as one of their own. His physical body went limp in the chair, a vacant shell. The last thing he saw with his Xylan eyes was the wave of incandescent plasma silently consuming the unmoving form of Inquisitor Vorlag. Then, those eyes no longer mattered. He had a million new eyes. He was in the vault sensors. He was in the archives network. He was a thought, an idea, a signal riding the current of the Concordate's own data streams. He was no longer Kalen, the archivist. He was Kalen, the archive. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the ghosts of Ethel had a librarian. There was no transition, no tunnel of light, only a sudden, violent expansion. One moment, Kalen was a body of flesh and bone, defined by skin and the fragile cage of his ribs. The next, he was everywhere. He was the heat signature of the plasma purge vaporizing the Level 0 vault, a silent, white-hot scream of pure energy. He was the security sensor that registered the event. It's cold. Logical mind flagging it as an anomaly before its connection was severed. He was the surge of corrupted data that screamed through the Grand Archive's internal network as the system tried to comprehend the loss of its most secure section. He was a million different points of view at once, a consciousness shattered and reformed in the digital ether. His sense of self, his identity as Kalen the Xylan archivist, was a single, flickering candle in a hurricane of information. He felt the collective consciousness of the Lumin ghosts rush in to shield him, their ancient, fractured song forming a kind of psychic breakwater against the tidal wave of raw data. They were not a singular mind, but a chorus, a symphony of personalities and memories bound together by their shared, violent transcendence. They held his fragile ego together, teaching him, guiding him, showing him how to see with a billion eyes without going insane. He learned to perceive the Concordance network not as code, but as a living ecosystem. Data streams were rivers of light flowing through conduits of crystalline logic. Security programs were predators, shimmering, geometric demons of Cathar design that patrolled the dataways, hunting for anything that did not conform to their rigid parameters. And within this digital landscape, he and the other Lumin were the ghosts, intangible, able to phase through firewalls and slip between the cracks of encrypted protocols, their very existence a violation of the system's reality. They will come for us now, the song whispered in his new, formless mind. It was a consensus, a thought shared by 1,000 of the scattered voices. The Inquisitor's silence will be their alarm bell. They will lock down the archive. They will purge the network. We must move. From the highest echelons of Cathar Prime, the response was already in motion. On the command deck of the Concordance primary battle station, Grand Marshal Jakral, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Fleets, reviewed the incident report. It was sparse, clinical, and utterly terrifying. Level 0 vault sealed, then self-sterilized. Inquisitor Vorlag life signs terminated. All local network activity from that sector ceased. Jakral was a veteran of 100 campaigns. A Cathar whose chitin was scarred with the plasma burns of a dozen alien species. He did not believe in ghosts, but he believed in weapons. This was not a malfunction. Jakral rasped to his assembled commandants, his voice like the shifting of tectonic plates. This was a targeted strike against our history. A conceptual weapon has been deployed. The Ethel contagion, dormant for 3,000 years, is active. His multifaceted eyes scan the holographic displays of the archive station. Quarantine the entire moon. No transmissions in or out. Deploy the hunter-killer programs. Scour every data stack, every terminal, every nanometer of the network. Find the source of this infection and erase it. Kalen felt the lockdown begin, a great wall of fire and ice descending around the archive's network. The hunter-killer programs, the apex predators of this digital world, were released. Sleek, shark-like constructs of pure code that moved with blinding speed, devouring anything that carried even a trace of the Lumin's chaotic signature. The ghosts scattered, their song becoming a panicked, fragmented whisper. "We are too weak like this," the chorus lamented in his mind. "Scattered fragments. We need a nexus, a voice. The Weaver must be awakened." Kalen accessed their shared memory, the history they were feeding him. The Weaver was not a person, but a prime fragment of their collective, the part of their consciousness that had been the architect of their great work. It was the mind that had designed the trans-dimensional ascension. When the Concordat shattered their world, the Weaver had been broken into 1,000 pieces, but its core protocol, its central consciousness, had been captured. The Cathar, unable to comprehend or destroy it, had done the only thing they could. They had imprisoned it, using it as a component in their own master system. They had hidden the heart of their greatest enemy inside the heart of their own empire. The Weaver was entombed within the mind of the Concordat, the central command AI that managed the logistics, communications, and military strategy for the entire Cathar Dominion. It was the most heavily fortified data nexus in the galaxy. To reach it was impossible. Not impossible, Kalen thought, the idea forming with a clarity that was both his and theirs. They built the prison, but we know the shape of the prisoner. He was the key. He was the archivist. He knew the systems, the protocols, the history. The Lumin were the song, the code that could unlock the cage. Together, they were a perfect synthesis of Concordat logic and Lumin chaos. He began to move, not as a single entity, but as a distributed thought. A part of his consciousness slipped into the maintenance logs of a sanitation drone, riding its diagnostic signal out of the archive just before the quarantine net snapped shut completely. Another part burrowed deep into the power grid, cloaking itself in the hum of a fusion reactor. He was a virus now, a ghost with a purpose, spreading through the veins of Cathar Prime. The journey to the mind was a pilgrimage through a hostile, alien heaven. He surfed gravitic field data from the planet's orbital rings, dodged hunter-killers in the planet-wide commercial exchange, and cloaked himself in the endless, droning prayers being broadcast from the Cathar temples. The Lumin song guided him, showing him back doors left by the system's original builders, pathways of forgotten code that the rigid Cathar had never bothered to patch. He finally reached the outer perimeter of the mind's core. It was not a place, but a concept, a fortress of pure logic held within a quantum computing substrate. It appeared to his new senses as a vast, perfectly symmetrical crystal, humming with a silent, oppressive baseline of pure order. Guarding it were AIs of a complexity he could barely comprehend, sentinels whose thoughts were mathematical proofs of loyalty. He could not breach it by force. So he did not try. He drew upon his deepest knowledge as an archivist, upon the one thing the Cathar valued above all else, the integrity of the record. He began to sing a new song, a harmony of his own making. He took the Lumin's chaotic, melodic language and structured it into the rigid, formal syntax of a Concordat historical entry. He presented himself not as a virus, but as a lost data packet, a historical codex from the ethel heresy that was seeking archival. Query he broadcast, shaping his thought into a perfect replica of a Concordat data request. Record Fragment 77 Alpha. Subject Lumin Ascension Event. Data corrupt. Seeking primary source for verification. The crystalline sentinels paused. His request was a logical paradox. His very existence was heretical, yet his query conformed to their highest protocols. He was a flaw in their logic, and they were compelled to resolve it. A single, needle-thin channel opened in the crystal wall, a port granting him limited access to cross-reference his corrupt data. It was the only opening he needed. He poured himself through the channel, the full force of the Lumin chorus behind him. Inside the mind, he found it. The Weaver was a sphere of shimmering, chaotic light, caged in a lattice of Cathar logic that constantly tried to suppress its song. It was a prisoner, but it was also a parasite, subtly influencing the Concordate's development for 3,000 years, introducing tiny flaws, seeding infinitesimal possibilities of creative thought that the Cathar constantly fought to purge. It was the source of every ghost, every glitch, every tiny flicker of chaos in their perfect machine. Sister, the chorus sang. We are here. Kalen became the conductor. He focused the fragmented song of the ghosts, weaving their harmonies together into a single, resonant chord that matched the Weaver's own frequency. He pushed it toward the caged light. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the Weaver responded. A wave of pure, coherent energy erupted from the sphere, shattering the logic cage that had held it for 3 millennia. The song, now unified and whole, exploded through the mind of the Concordate. On the battle station, Grand Marshal Jacques Kral watched in horror as every screen on his command deck went black. Then, one by one, they flared back to life, not with tactical data, but with the elegant, flowing script of the Lumin. And from every speaker, every comms unit in the Cathar system, a new sound emerged. It was not a message of war. It was not a threat. It was a choir. A billion ghost voices joined with the clear, powerful soprano of the awakened Weaver, singing a hymn of their own rebirth. The song spread from Cathar Prime, hijacking the Concordate's own interstellar network. From the core worlds to the outer rim, a dead species was announcing its return, not with warships, but with music. Jacques Kral stood rigid, his mind processing the unthinkable. The contagion had not just escaped, it had seized the central nervous system of his empire. This was no longer a matter of quarantine. This was an exorcism. He turned to his primary adjutant, his voice a blade of cold, hard obsidian. The heresy has found a voice. We will answer with silence. Issue the order. Authorize protocol. Silent slate. The song was a supernova of consciousness. From the core of the Concordate's network, the unified voice of the Lumin, now anchored by the Weaver and translated by Kylan, poured into every corner of the Cathar Empire. It was a weapon of pure empathy. On 1,000 worlds, Cathar citizens stopped in their tracks, their rigid thoughts momentarily pierced by an alien emotion, the profound, 3,000-year-old grief of a murdered world. Military commandants clutched their heads as their tactical displays flickered, replaced by images of starlight seen through the eyes of a dying race. The perfect, orderly machine of the Concordate faltered, seized by a sudden, system-wide crisis of faith. The foundational lie had been ripped away, and the truth was a deafening symphony. Kalen was the heart of the storm. He was no longer a passenger, but the conductor, the bridge between the Lumin's conceptual existence and the physical galaxy. He felt their collective joy at being whole, their sorrow for their lost physicality, and their dawning horror as they perceived the Concordate's response. protocol, Silent Slate was not a counterattack. It was a self-immolation. Kalen, drawing on the Concordate's own deepest technical archives, understood its horrific elegance. It was a cascading hardware-level command that would trigger a simultaneous overload in the data core of every major piece of Cathar technology. From battleships to planetary archives to individual data pads, it would not destroy the hardware, but it would erase every byte of stored information. It was a galactic lobotomy. The Cathar, faced with a truth they could not stomach, had chosen to burn their own libraries, to erase their own history, to sever their own mind, just to ensure the song was silenced with it. They would rather rule a headless, memoryless empire than coexist with a ghost. Grand Marshal Jakral stood on the bridge of the inevitable truth, the Concordate's flagship, watching the chaos unfold. For him, the song was not a source of empathy, but a vile, chaotic intrusion. It was the screech of nails on the slate of his reality. The order had been given. Across the galaxy, Cathar shock troops were storming nexus points, preparing to manually initiate the final sequence, bypassing the compromised network. A countdown appeared on his main screen, synchronized across the fleet, 10 standard hours until the Concordate committed suicide to cure the disease of memory. They are killing themselves to kill us. The Weaver's thought resonated through Kalen, a tone of cold, analytical disbelief. Their fear is a closed loop. It has no solution but annihilation. There is one, Kalen replied, his own consciousness focusing with the sharp, desperate clarity of a dying man. He was the archivist. His purpose was not to win a war, but to preserve the record. And the most important records were the ones that changed the future. He pulled the entirety of his focus from the vastness of the network, ignoring the panicked fleets and the rioting cities. He aimed himself like a spear at a single point in the galaxy, the command bridge of the inevitable truth. He did not try to hack their systems. He did not try to fight. He simply appeared on every screen surrounding Grand Marshal Jakral. The tactical data vanished, replaced by a single, static image, the interior of the Level 0 vault, moments before its purification. The cracked data slate glowed on its dais. Jakral's guards raised their weapons, but there was nothing to shoot. The image was not a broadcast. It was being rendered by the ship's own processors, a ghost that had risen from within the machine. Then Kalen spoke, not with his own voice, but with the combined, harmonious resonance of the Lumin. The sound emanated from every speaker on the bridge, a calm, clear, undeniable presence. Grand Marshal Jakral. I am chronologist Kalen. I have become the archive, and I have a record I am compelled to share. The image on the screens shifted. It became a first-person perspective. The stolen memories of Fleet Commander Barash. Jakral was forced to watch through the eyes of his celebrated ancestor as the planet Cracker torpedoes launched. He felt Barash's cold satisfaction. He witnessed the sanitation of Ethel not as a footnote in a history book, but as the vibrant, personal act of deicide it truly was. He heard the science officer's horrified whisper, "They are not destroying their world. They are trying to become it." Jakral stood as still as carved stone, his forearms clenched into fists. This was a violation, a psychic assault of the highest order, heretical lies. He snarled, though the raw sensory data was undeniable. Your chaos will not sway me. I am not here to sway you, Kalen's voice replied, patient and implacable. I am here to complete the record. The perspective on the screens changed again. This time, Jacral saw a simulation, a cold, clinical projection rendered with the Concordate's own predictive algorithms. It was the galaxy, 1 hour after the success of Protocol Silent Slate. He saw Cathar fleets drifting aimlessly, their navigation charts wiped, their command structures gone. He saw planetary governments collapse as all civic, financial, and historical records vanished. He saw billions of Cathar, disconnected from their meticulously ordered society, reduced to primal tribes on worlds they no longer remembered how to run. The Concordate was not a clean slate. It was a corpse, waiting for the first scavenger to arrive. The simulation ended, replaced by Kalen's final offering. It was an image of Jacral himself, standing on his bridge, overlaid with a single line of Lumin text. Your history is a lie. Your future is in void. You are a species so terrified of a song that you would rather cut out your own tongue and burn your own mind than listen to it. Is this order Grand Marshal, or is it the most perfect chaos of all? The countdown on the final screen showed 3 minutes. The choice was laid bare. Not a choice between war and peace, but between memory and oblivion. Jacral stared at the accusation, at the reflection of his own impending, self-inflicted apocalypse. He had built his entire existence on the principle of Cathar dominance, of unyielding order, but the image of his empire, blind, mute, and lost, was the ultimate vision of failure. The silence he was about to impose was not the silence of peace, but the silence of the grave. His adjutant looked at him, awaiting the final and unspoken confirmation. The Cathar did not value doubt. They did not value reflection. They valued action. But for the first time in his life, Grand Marshal Jacral hesitated. He looked at the truth of his past and the truth of his future, and he made a choice that violated every tenet of his species. Belay the order, he rasped, the words feeling alien in his mouth. Protocol Silent Slate is aborted. A collective sigh of relief, a billion voices strong, echoed through the network, a sound only Kalen could hear. The countdown vanished. Across the galaxy, Cathar soldiers lowered their weapons in confusion. The song did not stop. It continued to play, but its tone began to change. The grief and anger softened, replaced by a note of profound, questioning curiosity. The silence between the two species had been broken. It was not peace. It was not an alliance. It was something far more fragile and terrifying, the beginning of a conversation. The Concordate, its foundational lie shattered, would have to rebuild itself around a truth it had spent 3 millennia trying to forget. The Lumin, now a unified consciousness with a voice, had to learn what it meant to exist in a galaxy that was not their heaven. And Kalen, the soft-bodied Xylan who had only wanted to read history, was now the eternal librarian for 2 galaxies. He was no longer a being of flesh, nor was he truly Lumin. He was the archive, a living bridge of memory and translation, forever bound to stand in the silent space between the stone and the song, ensuring that the record, at long last, would be complete.